Riddle me this, riddle me that. Today, I'd like to share a story of a particularly entertaining riddle challenge that I included in one of my RPG campaigns on this episode of the Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Mark and I am the Local Disaster Tour Guide. That's right, I'm a storyteller who's really hoping I can win a ring in an upcoming riddle game. Welcome to my channel where we talk about role-playing games like Pathfinder and Starfinder. Today we're going to be doing a shorter video. We're going to be doing one of my success story videos. For those of you who are new to the channel, my success story series is where I share elements that I have included in one of my RPG games that proved particularly popular or enjoyable at my particular gaming table. These videos are intended specifically for DMs, especially for new DMs who may be trying to come up with encounters for their gaming group. So if you are not a storyteller, please feel free to leave this video but send your game master this way to see if maybe these ideas and stories might inspire them a little bit. But today I'm going to be talking about a particularly entertaining take that I had on a riddle challenge in one of my games. So if you would like to see some ideas on how you might be able to enhance these challenges of wit and intellect in your games, feel free to stick around. Okay, so today what I'm going to be doing is I'm actually going to be sharing two different challenges that I included in one of my games. One of them is probably more of a puzzle than a riddle, but both of them proved very entertaining when I threw these encounters at my players. To give you the backdrop for both of these encounters, I was running a Star Wars game. In particular, this was a Star Wars Saga Edition game, but these encounters are certainly something that could be applied to other modern or futuristic role-playing games. And in this particular Star Wars game, my players were going up against a villain that was very heavily inspired by the Joker in the Batman universe. If you can imagine some of the old 70s, 80s, and 90s comics and cartoons that might feature the Joker, you kind of have an idea of how this villain was portrayed over the course of many games. However, eventually my players managed to locate the villain's stronghold, and the time came for them to attack the villain's stronghold and try to take this Joker knockoff down. Now, obviously, the villain knew that the party was coming and had prepared plenty of interesting traps and tricks for the players to have to deal with before they could confront him directly. This was a very dangerous location that included a lot of fairly standard traps. Blade spikes popping out all over the place, all sorts of false leads and false doors, murder holes where the villain's minions could attack players from behind a wall while remaining relatively safe themselves. This was definitely a dangerous location, but one of the elements that the party encountered as they were moving through this is at several points along the way, in order to progress to the next part of the stronghold, the party had to solve a puzzle or a riddle to get past certain doors. Now this happened a few times, and I definitely got my party used to this pattern of they had to beat these games of intellect if they wanted to proceed before I threw two particularly devious tricks at them. The first one was a light puzzle. As the party approached the door, they found 4 lights over top the door and 3 switches alongside the wall. And beside this door, they saw a very simple set of instructions. Light 3 to proceed. The nature of the puzzle was very obvious. I'm sure you've seen this in plenty of RPGs and computer games before. The party had to pull the correct combination of switches in order to light exactly 3 of the bulbs, and then they would be able to proceed to the next part of the stronghold. Only, there was a really fun catch to this particular puzzle, which is you could not solve the puzzle by pulling the switches. At least, not directly. The switches and the lights were programmed in such a way that no matter what switch you pulled, no matter what order you pulled the switches, you would always light 0, 1, 2, or 4 of the light bulbs. There was no correct combination that would actually light exactly 3 of the bulbs. Instead, the intended solution to this puzzle was you just had to pull switches at random until 4 of the bulbs actually lit up, and then you had to unscrew one and take it out. This was a beautifully, beautifully frustrating puzzle for my players, and I remember watching them taking notes and, okay, I pulled this switch and it did this bulb and this bulb, and trying to figure out a pattern. They very quickly realized that if they pulled a switch, it didn't always ignite the same bulbs or turn off the same bulbs, and so they started playing this game, okay, maybe this switch changes when I pull that switch first, and they went through every combination imaginable trying to figure out what on earth could be the correct pull order for the switches, until finally one of my players just got angry and said, "I punch one of those stupid bulbs!" Ding! The door slid open. And just the look on my players' faces when they realized the level of the joke I'd pulled on them, it was wonderful. One of the things that you can do to enhance puzzles and riddles in your game is to create a situation where part of solving the puzzle involves using an element that is not immediately apparent as part of the puzzle. Most people looking at that puzzle don't think that you can manipulate both the switches and the light bulbs. But that was hardly the meanest trick that I pulled on my party in that session, because as they advanced through the last section of this stronghold, and through many more dangerous traps and obstacles, they finally came to an elevator that was going to take them down to the control room where the villain was holed up. And this elevator had a riddle inscribed on the wall alongside of it. Now, please allow me to apologize. I couldn't find the riddle that I actually used for this. I remember that the correct answer to the riddle was quarry, but it's been over a decade since I actually ran this particular scenario, and when I went back and tried to research the old riddle that I used, I just couldn't find it. But basically what I did when I wrote this particular encounter is I went online and I found just a basic riddle somewhere that would work inside the context of the Star Wars game that I was running, and had it inscribed on the wall alongside this elevator. And the party, having been programmed by all of the previous riddles that they encountered, they knew exactly what to do. They had to figure out the answer to the riddle before they could progress the story. Now, as I said, the correct answer to this riddle was quarry. My players obviously did not figure this out at first, and in fact, I didn't intend for them to figure this out at first. Instead, what I was waiting for was a reasonable answer of any kind. Well, one of my players was very excited about playing Star Wars and playing a Jedi in particular, and when they read this particular riddle, it sounded like a Jedi to them. And so they walked up and they said in a very proud and confident voice, "The Jedi." The perfect opportunity had presented itself. So, ding, the door slides open, and the party proudly walks inside the elevator, ready to progress to the next and final stage of this stronghold. But then, the doors slam shut. My party begins to look around nervously, and the voice of the villain comes over the speaker and says, "Actually, that answer was incorrect. But I'm feeling generous, so I'm going to give you 3 more guesses to figure out the answer to my riddle before I cut the cable to the elevator that you're in. Oh, by the way, the next 3 words that I hear you say are your official guesses. Begin." At this point, I informed my party that they were no longer allowed to try to communicate with each other to come up with an answer. The next 3 words that anybody said, those were going to be their answers for the riddle. It is rare that I get to see a group of player characters sweat the way that I did my gaming group that night. Realizing they had 3 words, 3 guesses, or they were going to plummet possibly to their death. Oh, it was beautiful. Now, I will tell you, in my gaming group, I had one player who was a particularly intelligent and crafty person, and they actually managed to figure out the correct answer, the answer of quarry that I mentioned earlier. So they saved the group from a pretty painful plummet. In that particular encounter, I had set it up where if they failed to answer correctly, they would take 8d6 falling damage and tumble into the control room of the villain and basically be at a severe disadvantage when the fight started. But as I said, one player was pretty intelligent, did figure out the proper answer, and as such, the party was able to go into the final boss battle at a much better level of health. But one of the things that you as a storyteller can do to make riddles more intimidating in your games is play on the sense of confidence that your players might have after solving a riddle. One of the things I did in setting up this particular encounter was establish a pattern. Solve the riddle, you get to proceed. So when they got to that final elevator encounter, when they successfully solved the riddle, they had no reason not to step inside the elevator and put themselves in much more serious danger. So I guess the moral of the story for DMs is this: if you want to include puzzles and riddles in your game, it can be a fantastic tool. But don't forget, you can play with the circumstances around the puzzles and the circumstances around the riddles to make those encounters more dangerous, more challenging, and more memorable for your players. Now, if you want to do this, it is helpful to establish a pattern first so you can break that pattern and make the encounter more dramatic. In my game, I gave them several doors with regular riddles that followed that predictable pattern. Solve the riddle, proceed. Then I threw them off a little bit with the light bulb encounter, but they still came to that final riddle at the elevator, assuming that if they can figure out the right or creative solution to a riddle, they would proceed normally. And as such, they did not expect the trap. If you want to lay a trap like that, make sure you establish a pattern first to help trick your players into it. But encounters like these can be a ton of fun and can really get your players sweating. And like I said, even though I used these encounters in a Star Wars game, this could go in any modern or futuristic style game, and even with a little bit of creative reworking, do some magical room puzzles in a fantasy game. You could even do a fantasy setting as well. These kinds of challenges are very adaptable. But as I said, this is a really quick video today. That is just 2 examples of a puzzle and a riddle that I have thrown at my players that proved very memorable and very engaging. Now, let me throw the conversation over to you. Storytellers, or players who may have stuck around longer than they should have, what are some of the most engaging and exciting examples of puzzles and riddles that you have seen at your gaming table? Feel free to leave some examples in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, like it and share it. Subscribe to the channel, we have more content coming out. And thank you so much for being a part of the conversation. Have a wonderful day.